Hello everyone and welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to be talking about water deposition. But before we talk about water deposition today, we first have to go back and review what deposition is. So deposition is the process of the rocks and materials being dropped into a new location. So we have in our changes to the surface of the earth, we kind of have three processes that are going along simultaneously. And they are all working together at the same time to change how the surface of the earth looks. Now, even though we have these arrows right here, and I'm going to try to highlight it in a brighter color. Even though we have these arrows right here showing that it goes from weathering to erosion to deposition, we kind of understand as scientists that these are going along simultaneously or at the same times. So as some things are being weathered and broken down, other things are being eroded or moved. And as some things are being eroded and moved, some are also being deposited in a new location. So it all depends on as things are kind of breaking down, and as they are breaking down, some things begin to be moved and deposited quicker than others. And so again, deposition is kind of what we think is at that last link. It's after it has been moved by water, wind, or ice, it becomes to get settled in a new place. And so how does deposition work with water? Well, let's talk about deposition along a river, because one thing that uh, rivers do is they begin to erode or begin to kind of move things. And so, what we can kind of think about is, if we think about the flow of material as we begin to erode and weather and break down pieces. So let's say right here, the river is kind of it's kind of hitting against the side of the riverbank, um, and then begins to move down the river. Now, this blue line is the main current. And so the main current is usually has faster moving water. And so if we look at this point bar, if let's say some sediments get off of the main current, they can be deposited at this point bar. And sometimes this is called like a deposition bank, or a lot of times we may call it a sand bank, because this is where a lot of sand gets piled up over time, and it begins to create this little formation of land. So eventually, as this deposition bank or depositing bank gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it gets to a point where it becomes like its own little mini landform. And as those sediments get more tightly packed, they can people to begin to walk on, and things such as that. And so that's how deposition works along a river. As the main current begins to continue to bring down smaller materials, if things are pretty heavy or not following that main current, they can be deposited along riverbanks to create little sandbars. Now, let's say something else happened. Let's say we have some sediments and they carry all the way down to the river's end. And this is what happens at the deposition of the end of rivers. Let's say some sediments go along the main path and never get deposited into a deposition bank, into a sandbar like that. So as the river flows into a larger body of water, particles of rocks it is carrying drop down. And these particles and rocks pile up to create a new landform called a delta. So if you think about this, right, we have a deposition bank or depositing bank in our river. But as sediments begin to create kind of at the end of a river, we call it a delta. So if we look at the second picture, and I'm going to try to highlight in yellow, and hopefully it shows up. For example, all of this gray and little like what looks like landforms over here are all sediments that have been carried down this river. And as they get carried down the river, as the ocean, now some of the ocean might carry some of those sediments away, but they begin to settle down. And that's what deposition means, to deposit, to kind of drop them into a new location. And this location happens to be at the end of the river, and they're kind of forming this delta. Now, one of the cool things about living in the United States is that we have a part of our nation that is a really big delta, and that's Louisiana. Now, of course, Louisiana over time has gotten bigger. Now, one thing that's never going to happen is, let's say I go to Louisiana next year, and or even this year. If I go to Louisiana 5 years from now, it's not going to be this huge thing. But one thing that I think is really cool, and I encourage you to do, is look at some time lapse videos of Louisiana over the years, and you can see how Louisiana grew as we begin to go down the river and deposit different things. So, in summary, deposition is sometimes what we think of as the final step of our change to land. And it's when pieces settle down in a new area after erosion has occurred. And this deposition can occur through the same three processes of water, wind, and ice. And many times we see deposition by water along things like rivers and sometimes even oceans through different currents. And as the river, as the sediments go through, if they're not on the main current or a little bit heavier, they may be deposited into deposition banks and kind of create sandbars along the river. Or if they get to the end of the river and into the ocean, eventually as sediments build up, they create deltas. So I hope this helps, and I can't wait to see y'all in the next video. Bye, everyone.